We move on to our second talk in the morning, and Derek Scott, University of Leeds, a forgotten transcultural entertainment industry, early 20th century operetta from the German stage.
Just waiting. Look at that. First success. I'll just say that the project that I'm involved in is mainly me. I'm 80%. I started off lower, but when the United Kingdom voted for Brexit, the pound went down and the money went up. So my university made me work more on this project. I do have a senior research fellow 1 day a week working and having a related theme. She is studying operetta in Warsaw, which is a very neglected topic indeed. Then I have help with web design, because I'm useless at web design, and even just putting things on the web. And then I have help with someone who is digitizing scores that are in the public domain to help people have access to a lot of this music, which has become rare now, even though it was incredibly popular in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. So I'll now say why I linked on this project. And I'm amazed to see so many people here, because when I mentioned the reception of German opera in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, people tend to walk away yawning as if they think, oh no, could it be any more dull? But why it interested me greatly was that in the West End in London, I discovered that over 60 German operettas were performed, in English versions, of course, and over 70 in the same period on Broadway. And then I discovered that they were happening all over Europe, St. Petersburg, Helsinki, you name it, these operettas traveled. And I realized that when we talk about popular music, and that is my field, popular music of the past 200 years, actually, we tend to think always mainly of Anglo-American pop music, or we might think of film music. The musical stage and the early 20th century musical stage has tended to be neglected by people who research music. So today, to narrow it down and give you an idea of the kind of research I've been doing, I have in my sight the music business of the first 3 decades of the 20th century. And I'm arguing that when we study this period, we should recognize, am I bumping things? We should recognize the importance of a transcultural operetta industry reaching out from Berlin, and not, as so many people do, always just look to the Broadway musical and trace the history of that. It was, in fact, in Berlin where theater managers and producers from around Europe and North America traveled to buy rights to operetta and view the latest stage successes. If operetta enjoyed success in what was the modern city of Berlin still, and the adventurous days of the Weimar Republic, then it was generally thought a more reliable indicator that it would be successful elsewhere than if it was successful in Vienna, because Vienna was still seen as more conservative. It was not until the mid-1920s that Broadway had a theatrical product to rival that of the Friedrichstrasse, the theater district in Berlin. And before the advent of sound film, the music industry concentrated its attention on 2 products that had indisputable international appeal: operetta from the German stage, dance band music from the USA. None of this was lost on the philosopher and cultural critic Theodor Adorno. Adorno is, often dragged in whenever possible when people discuss popular music, because he didn't really like it, and he wrote an awful lot about it. And everyone knows his views on dance band music, but not many people know his views on operetta. But he wrote lots and lots about it. And if you are interested and you read German, it's not really available in translation. It's volumes 18 and 19 of the complete works of Adorno. He considered the music of operetta to be outdated or depraved art music, which was not far off his opinion of Tin Pan Alley music in the USA as well. Instead of Adorno finding new techniques and devices in popular music, he sees it simply as getting worse and worse, and links its erosion and trivialization specifically to the industrialization of its production. He was actually also one of the first to notice the influence of popular music on fashion. He says in one review, he writes in Frankfurt, that he's noticed that women are walking around the city looking as if they've stolen their dresses from operettas. Now, in fact, in the case of the 20th century operetta that really launched a second enthusiasm, you know, the golden ages, Offenbach, Johann Strauss, Johann Strauss' Sohn, Gilbert de Sullivan, those kind of people. There was a kind of decline in the 1890s, other forms taking over. But in 1905, December, the Die lustige Witwe, the Merry Widow, was performed in Vienna. It wasn't an enormous success, but 2 years later, it was a sensational success in London. And the same year, 1907, a sensational success on Broadway. And suddenly the appetite was there. Now, let's have a look at the craze in New York for anything branded with the Merry Widow label. The Merry Widow hat first, the hat designed by Lucille in London for the part of the Merry, it just got bigger and bigger. It ended up, I think, a meter across or something. Everyone wanted the Merry Widow hat, the Merry Widow cigars. There were Merry Widow steaks, there were Merry Widow corsets. And this cartoon that appeared in the New Yorker makes fun of exactly that phenomenon. Operetta not only transferred across borders, it also transferred between different platforms, media platforms, that is, which is characteristic of industrialized production. So that dance bands took to playing operetta, and composers knew that if they included waltzes, tangos, and foxtrots in their operettas, they would suddenly be appearing in the dance halls. And I think I've got examples of that I'll play you later. It happened both sides of the Atlantic. Let's show you how this works. First of all, I'll play, oh, I can't see it. I'll play the song that appears in an operetta by Leo Fahl called Madame Pompadour, and this is how it was sung by two people that played the original roles.
Josef, ach Josef, was bist du so keusch? Das Küssen macht für wahr doch kein Geräusch. Ach Josef, du wunderbarer Mann, vor allem zieh den Mantel aus, du hast ja viel zu viel auf an. Josef, oh, was bist du so keusch? Das Küssen macht für wahr doch kein Geräusch.
Treib das Ding nicht bis zum Gipfel, fass mich bloß nicht so beim Zipfel meines Mantels an, ich bitte dich, bleibe züchtig, bleibe sittlich, sonst verliere ich meine Ruhe und vergesse, was ich tue. Oh.
And now, the dance band. that off there. You get so it's fairly straightforward to turn these pieces into dance music. So I'm saying that there was an enormous impact, lots of enthusiasm, and then, of course, we have a slight problem, the First World War. Particularly problematic with Berlin and London. By then, there were strong links with entertainment, music, and London. Berlin's Metropole Theatre was floating on the London Stock Exchange. There were so many of these kind of links. So what happens, the enthusiasm for this music is still great. There was a piece playing, the theatre manager thought he would get away. It's originally Die Kinokönigin, the film queen, the cinema star, it was called in London. And the composer was Max Winterfeld, but he used a pseudonym, Jean Gilbert. Now, people would think it was French, but unfortunately it was discovered, and although it was making profit and people coming to the theatre, the patriotic thing to do was to remove it. About 4 months later, it was touring around Britain without people realizing again, in crowded houses. There were various ways you could get around this. One, Kalman German operetta survived because they put in some British patriotic songs, so people were not sure where this music had originally come from. New York was a little different because the USA didn't enter the war until April 1917. By at that time, there were lots of German operettas in adaptations on Broadway. A decision was finally taken to ban German operetta in 1919, and of course someone pointed out, well, the war's over now, so why bother? So in fact, it went on. Let's have a look at a more detailed look at the operetta industry in 1931. Im Weißen Rössel was the great hit of that year, and it was performed in France as Le Cheval Blanc, in London, White Horse Inn, same in New York. I've got here is a program for production. It advertises Edison Bell Records. So again, we have the interlinking of the industry. You're taking people into theatre, but you're trying to sell records as well. We're informed that you can buy these records at a place called Keith Prowse. So then you look up, see what else does Keith Prowse do? Well, they began as ticket agents, and now they do an enormous amount. They sell instruments, they sell the gramophones to play records, they sell the sheet music. And this shows the way that, unlike the 19th century, the music industry has really done all that business of horizontal integration, vertical integration, and so on. Now we mustn't forget technology, and this probably will interest some people in this room now, that there had been great strides in stage lighting in the 1920s. If we look at this advert in the program, Ventrico are making the claim that a new era has begun with the lighting of White Horse Inn, and they achieved it under Schwaber Hazeit patents. Although, notice they stress it's with the employment of British material and labour. Hans Schwaber had been active in Berlin before the First World War, and he developed a battery of 1,000-watt lanterns that replaced the large central lanterns at the Deutsches Theater and gave an even spread of light. Schwaber's assistant, Reicher, developed a machine that projected clouds onto the cyclorama. I know it's not well defined there. The cyclorama is basically that part of the stage that depicts the sky. It's the very back. And he could create wonderful effects with this, including the effect of thunderstorm clouds and so on. the Schwab-Hazite system had already been tried out in London before, but it was used to great effect in White Horse Inn. It was so fantastic, it made such a sensational impression that, of course, the next thing is you think, wouldn't you like to actually go to the White Horse Inn? Well, in the program, it tells you how to get there now. You can go and, it's still there today, incidentally. As part of my research, I felt obliged to go and have a look. I told the ERC there was an archive there. And there was. Amazing. Because Bernatsky, who wrote White Horse Inn, actually is buried in St. Wolfgang am See. So there we are. These are the pleasures of ERC grants. They wouldn't pay for my beer, though, but there we are. You can't win them all. So let's hear some music. See how the piano roll. We often forget the piano roll. Remember that until about 1930, pianolas, player pianos, were everywhere. So I couldn't get anyone to play one, but have a little listen to this to hear what a piano roll sounds like. I don't know whether you can see. Of course, it didn't work. You sat at the piano and pedaled and the roll. It had punched holes in it and played the notes. And that was a song that was very popular by who was it? Robert Stoltz, who wrote many operettas. That was not actually from one of his operettas, but it's no real difference in style. And it's useful for me to show how it proceeded, because here's the song. I'll play a little extract of.
Schönste Blume des Morgenlands, Salome.
Well, beautifully sung. It was a hit song, and it was one of the big hits in the 1920s. But just to prove that this music is really linked to popular music that comes later, here is. It became a hit again in the 1960s. I think I've got... the words were changed. This is Petula Clark singing the same song. Hear a little of this.
I studied Shakespeare when I was at school. Thought Romeo was a pet. Felt if I met him I'd act like a fool. I'd be a poor Juliet. Now that I know him I'm not really sure, for you're as charming as he. Saying the same things to all the girls, or is it just to me?
Well, you get the impression. It's a rather different version. Hit all over Europe, though, in different languages and so on. Another avenue for money making, and the last example I'll play is it's from film. There had, surprisingly perhaps for some, been quite a lot of films of silent films of operetta. But you could actually, it was a chance to see the stars, there. And remember, silent films were never silent. They were always, if at the very least a piano, but often theatre orchestras playing. Even Alfred Hitchcock made a an operetta film. Not many people see it. Waltzes from Vienna, based on a German operetta. The one I want to show you a clip of is from a film operetta, an operetta actually made for film, one of the earliest indeed, Die Drei von der Tankstelle, the three from the petrol pumps. I know it doesn't sound as if it's going to be a thrilling film. Actually, three from the filling station. But, you know, it's the wild, decadent days of the Weimar Republic. And I wanted to show the end of this because, again, most people do not look at the popular. They look at art and music, or they look at art productions on stage. And everyone knows Brecht and defamiliarization, Verfremdungseffekt and all that. Well, this end of the end of this particular film is rather startling. It looks as if it's going to end, and then suddenly something goes wrong, and you'll see what happens. This is my last example.
Weise vergreift an einem so schwachen, bezaubernden.
He gets the girl, the three friends. So are they going to be annoyed? No, because they're all friends. So the ones disappointed in love can take it. So they're singing the hit song. Ein Freund, ein guter Freund. A friend, a good friend. We stick together. And this is it. So, the end.
Aber wie?
Nur wieder los.
Die Leute.
There's suddenly those people there.
Publikum.
Wo denn?
Da.
There they are.
Ja, wirklich. Lauter fremde Menschen.
Was machen denn die noch hier? Wir sehen es doch aus.
What are they doing here? It's ended.
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren.
Ganz wild. Gibt's weiter. Zu einer richtigen Operette gehört doch ein Finale.
They're waiting for a proper operetta finale.
Einen Augenblick bitte.
Just one moment, please. You have to have the girls dance. And some folk costume as well. And to think the word camp was fairly new when this was happening, but not for long. Then we have Lillian Harvey showing just what she can do. It really does end. They're afraid. And of course, a couple of years later, maybe 3 years later, everything does end because 80% of people involved in operetta were Jewish. And so, you know, think what happens in 1933, 1934. And that's it. And then it gets forgotten. That's the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for such an enjoyable talk. Anyway, do you have any questions? There are any questions in the audience?
Thank you. That was really great fun.
Oh,
I had a question about the adaptation of the script. So obviously it was translated for the English stage, but I'm aware that now scripts are changed when they go to the States and they make changes. Did they do the same at the time?
Yes, they did. The Merry Widow had exactly the same English version, but Americans started doing their own adaptations. And it wasn't just translation. They would change whole scenes. They would put extra scenes in. They're really, really reworked. So in fact, if you are in Vienna or Berlin today at the Komischaper in Berlin, and you see these operettas, they're not necessarily the ones that were seen in Barcelona or London or Paris or whatever, because everyone felt free to do what they liked with operetta.
I have a question myself.
Oh, you're not letting me get away.
No, I'm not. I could see that the point of this exercise, of this project, is to demonstrate that there is a type of, the operetta wasn't only in Germany, but the influence and so on. But what major questions are you answering? So is it transnationalism? Is it early globalization, if you want to use the word? Yeah.
Actually, it's the question of a lot of people are getting to grips with now. Globalization is such a top-down term that implies, you know, the industries are manipulating people everywhere or what happened. But we see that it's not actually true, because the local is often of interest as well. It has a global retail value, the local. What interests me particularly is I'm interested in cosmopolitanism as a solution for some of the problems we have now. And operetta of this period was one of the clear examples of a cosmopolitan culture traveling, and people felt that they could do with it what they wanted. They responded, they recognized themselves in these pieces. They didn't think, oh, that's a German piece, you know, stamped made in Germany, or this is a British piece or an American piece or a French piece. It was a form that appealed widely to people in big cities, really.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.